this recording. So this recording will be available on the NECyouth page, and we'll share that on Nella Grace's platform as well as on NECyouth, so you can find that. My name is Melissa and I'm the host for today. I'll be asking the questions and just kind of making sure everyone gets their voice heard during this session. Just let in somebody else from the waiting room. So just to introduce you, if you don't know much about Nella Grace or Petty, as you probably know her as her actual name in real life, she shared a little bio with me about herself, so I'll just share that with you now to give you a little insight into who she is. So Nella Grace is a final year medical student. She's a content creator, entrepreneur, and also has an online ministry. Having graduated with her first class honours in biomedical sciences at the University of Bradford, she then went on to study medicine abroad. She has two businesses, one being a consulting business where she helps prospective students gain admission into medical school. Nella also has a student lifestyle-based YouTube channel aiming to inspire and show others how they can excel in their studies with events like today. Lastly, she's recently launched an online ministry for women at Biblical Boss Babe for women who are living for God's heart. I'll type that app in the chat in a little while. Those that are striving for success and thriving in their femininity. Having a lot on her plate, she's well versed in organization and time management and how to be efficient in both. So I'm going to hand over to Petty now as she shares her experiences and also some tips on how we can all be better students, no matter what age or what stage of life we are at. Thanks.
Hi guys, hi everyone. So yeah, like what Melissa said, I'm a student, as some of you might know, or might not know. I'm a medical student, so I study abroad in Lithuania, and I also have a degree previously in biomedical sciences. I've got a first class bachelor's in that, and then I went on to postgrad medicine. And I'm very passionate about time management, about productivity, because obviously as someone who has so much on their plate, it's something that I had to get done for me to be productive, for me to be able to be efficient in a lot of things. And also I've learned a lot I've been in education, higher education for about 9 years, going on 9 years. So I've also learned a lot about how to study, the best ways to study, and I've tested it myself to see. I used to be an average student, getting about 70% in medical school. And then I managed to bump myself up to averaging 90%. I'm using the study techniques that I researched and find out for myself. And I try to share that with other people because I know that a lot of times students don't know how to study and they don't know like what is the best way to study. We just kind of do things according to what other people do, and we've never really been taught how to. So that's really the things I'm really passionate about when it comes to education. It's time management, productivity, and also studying. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys mostly about time management and productivity. And then I'll have some questions, and then I'm going to have a presentation on time management and productivity, some questions, and then I'll talk freely about study techniques. That is because I don't have a presentation for that, because I've realized that in the past when I've done a presentation on study techniques, I get loads of questions that would be better done in a Q&A way than it is in a presentation way, because I would like to tailor it to your specific problem. So I could tell you how to study something and then you might not think, well, that might not apply to me when it does. So the second section about actual study skills, I'll kind of give a synopsis and then we'll go about that in a Q&A kind of way. But if there's no questions, that's also okay. I'll also talk freely about it without presentation. So yeah, that is the plan for my presentation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You have the ability to share your screen, so let's jump in.
Okay, let me do that. Where do I do that?
At the bottom.
Oh yeah, green, I see it. Okay, cool. Share screen. I think I should be able to see my screen now.
It's got a green ring around it.
Have you seen it?
Not yet.
Can you see my screen now?
Not yet. Let's see.
It says I am sharing.
Okay. Can anybody else see it? It's just me. Let me exit gallery view. No, we definitely can't see it. So.
Okay. Let me. Oh, okay. Yeah, you should be able to know.
Yeah, we good.
It's all good now, yeah? Okay. Okay. So like I said, I'll be sharing to you guys about time management and productivity. My name is Petty, but I'm also called Nella. Nella on social media, Petty in real life, but you can call me whatever you would like. So like I said, my background, I love everything to do with time management, productivity, because this is how I thrive. This is how I'm able to do anything. As someone who has, businesses and uni and work and all these things, I just can't do it without it. So I've managed to kind of hone in how I do things, and that's what I want to share with everyone, just so you can maybe gain something from it. And then this is the backbone, this time management and productivity is the backbone of my study techniques also, because if you don't manage your time well, then you can't be productive and you can't study well and you can't do well at your studies. So that's why this is the start of it. So just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about is the idea of God and time, how we are made in his image, the lessons we can get from the word. I'll have the practical examples first and then the questions for this part of the presentation after. And then we can move on after that to talk about study techniques. So God and time. So I base everything in life from obviously God, the word. He is the creator. He's the creator of everything, including time. So there's no other person to get this information from than the creator of it, right? So I always think, if you can't find it in the Bible, then I don't know where else you can find it. Obviously, there's, people like to say, oh, you're over spiritualizing things, but I just don't believe in that. I just think that we can find practical steps to anything. So that is what we're going to talk about first, is God and time and the word and time. So I put here that in the beginning there was time. And the reason I said that is because God, that's the thing that he created first, was time to us. And even though God is not governed by time, he obviously operates outside of time. He created time first. He said, let there be light. Light is the sun, the moon, everything is what governs time, night and day. Then he created days. He said, let there be evening and morning. And then after he created days, he rested and he created a week. So the first thing he did was create time for us to be under, which means that time is obviously a very important thing, because that's what he chose to operate, for us to operate under. So I put here that God created us to operate under time, and our world is governed by it. Obviously, we exist in time, space, and matter, but time is one of the first things that God created. So it's so important that it's also the medium in which he chose to separate himself and for us to worship him. Hence why he created the Sabbath. So he created this time, he created days, Monday to, Sunday to Friday, and then he rested on the seventh day. And this rest, this Sabbath, this time that he set apart and made holy is what he chose for us to worship him by. He says, on this day, keep this day, work 6 days of the week, but the seventh day shall be holy. And in this day that we are to be with him and to rest and have this time to spend with him, this is the medium which he chose for us to worship him, is time. And it's also the medium that he used to separate himself as the creator. Again, it's time. So time is obviously a very, very important thing to God. And lastly, I put that is the medium which he uses to communicate with us, in the sense that he gives us prophecy. He gives us prophecies to show us who he is and what he intends to do. So God is omniscient, he's all-knowing, and the reason he's all-knowing is because he is God, right? So that's why he communicates with us through prophecies. He tells us when things are going to happen. He told us when Jesus was going to come back the first time. He's told us when Jesus is going to come back the second time. And it's through time, it's through time prophecies as well as other prophecies. So my point is that God is very specific about time. He wants us to take time seriously, and we're going to learn more principles about how to do that later. So we are made in his image, right? In the Bible, in Genesis 1, it says that God says, let us make man in our image. So meaning that we are to bear his likeness, to be like him. So if time is important to God and we are made in his image, the best place to learn about how to manage time is to be in his word. So that's the best place for us to learn about the very thing that he has given us. And even though there's more to being made in the image of God, but if God is a God of time, we are made in his image, we should operate in that. So I put here that when we're living in the true light and life and created purpose of God, then we are productive and manage our time well. that is not to say that our purpose is obviously to be productive, but when we are operating in our purpose, our created purpose as image bearers, as people made in the image of God, then we are productive. We are people that manage our time well, because that's who God is. And if he's like that, and we are in his image, and if we're operating in that, then we will be people that are productive, time management, and also excelling as students in our studies and things like that. I always think, if God created everything in the world, what better person to give us the knowledge that we need when it comes to university work or anything like that? So that is the basis and the backbone that I want us all to really think about, that at the end of the day, this is the will of God, that we be these kind of people. We be people that are stewards of our time. We be people that are productive. We be people that are managing our time well, because that's who he is, and that's how he's created us. So if we look in the word of God, the lessons that I'm going to be kind of breaking down and talking about practically are these 4 lessons from the word. Obviously, there's so many different things that you can get about time management, productivity, studying. Even if you just look at the book of Daniel, about him, if you look at the life of David, of Joseph, of Jesus himself, you will see the principles that it takes for us to be excelling as students. But these are the 4 main lessons that I want to look at when it comes to organization, time management, and productivity. So the first kind of principle is the principle of planning. When you want to be a productive person, you need to be a good planner, right? And we see this concept in the Bible. So the first big project that God did or wanted to do was with Noah. If you look at Genesis 6, God decides that the world is very wicked. He wants to destroy it. And then he gives Noah the plan of how he's going to do that. And if you look in Genesis 6, verse 14, I'll just open it quickly, what it says, so that we can understand that idea of planning. Because God, when he does anything, you will see, when you read the word, you will see that before God does anything, he always has a plan, and he always gives his plan to his servants before he goes about and just does anything. So in verse 14 of Genesis 6, he says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark and cover it with pitch inside and out. In verse 15, this is how you are to make it. And then he goes and gives Noah the plan of how it was going to be, how long it was going to be. So he made a plan before he even done anything, before he gathered all of the things that he needed to do, before he went about trying to be productive. He made a plan, and that was God giving that to Noah. You see the same thing in the sanctuary. When God wanted to create his sanctuary on earth, in Exodus with the Israelites, so that he could dwell among them, he says, what did he do? The first thing that he did was create a plan. So if you go to Exodus 25, at the very beginning, it says in verse 9, Exodus 25 verse 9, it says, you must make it according to all that I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle, as well as the pattern of all its furnishings. So basically he says, you're going to make this sanctuary how I'm going to show you according to this plan. So God is a God of plans. He starts off with planning first before you can be productive. That's the first lesson we need to make. And we're going to flesh this out and see how we can practically do this as students and as people in order for us to be productive. The next thing you say is, after you've planned, you need to be organized. You need to be organized with the things that you have. And I call this the principle of space and activity. And you see this in Genesis chapter 1. In creation, when God is creating, he makes a space first, and then he fills it with something in the realm of time. So what do I mean by that? So if you go to Genesis 1, it says in Genesis 1 verse 2, it says, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated from the darkness. So the principle of space. So what was the space? There was a space that was the earth, which was empty and dark. And then God made an activity to fill that space. So he organized the space and then filled it with an activity. The space was, the earth was covered with darkness, and then he filled it with light. You see the same thing in the next part. He says in the verse 6, it says, then God said, let there be an expanse between the waters, separating the water from the water. God made the expanse separated from the water, under the expanse, from the water above the expanse. And so it was, so basically God made water, right? He separated the waters, and then he called the sky, and then that was the second day. And then later on, he fills that space of the sky and also the waters with on a different day, he fills it with birds, and he fills the waters and the earth with other things. So the idea that there was a space, an empty space, that he created, and then he filled it with activity. That's basically how you get to organizing yourself. You have a space, you have a time in your day, and then you fill that time with an activity. But to do that, you must plan first before you can organize. I'm hoping that's making sense. And then the next thing you do is to be productive. So you've planned, you've organized, but there's a plan without action is basically not a plan, right? So you need to now start being productive. And the verse that I have here is Matthew 25, verse 14 to 20. And Matthew 25 in general is talking about, you have the parable of the 10 virgins, and then you go into the parable of the talents. And the idea is that these people were given different talents, different amount of talents. And then I suggest that you really read this and understand the lessons that we get about productivity, because in this, people were given different talents, and according to how many talents they did, they either multiplied it or some buried it. It's the same thing with, if you just replace that with time. God might give you and I different times. So for example, maybe I have a more demanding job that requires me to be working 12 hours a day, so I only have maybe 2 hours free time. Maybe you have a job that you work 6 hours a day, and then you have maybe 5 hours of free time. God still expects us to use this time in a way that glorifies Him, in a way that is productive, no matter how small or how big it is. Because it doesn't make sense for us to say, okay, I only have 2 hours in the daytime, so therefore I'm going to watch Netflix for about 2 hours instead of being productive. That means you're not using that time in a way that is as productive as you could be, and therefore you are burying your talents. The same thing. So plan, organize, be productive. And the last and most important thing is rest. I think that in this hustle world where everyone wants to go, make money, do all these things. Also, as a student, you want to be studying and getting top grades. We really neglect rest. And yet rest was not only a commandment from God, but it is a health principle. It's a productivity principle. And because when you don't rest, then you can't be productive. So that's the last principle that we're going to be looking at, lessons from the word, and we're going to be fleshing these out, like I said, with more practical steps when it comes to be a student lifestyle. So planning. How do I plan? So for me, these are the 4 main concepts of how I do my planning. I gather, I categorize, I map out, and I use the specific tools that I need in order for me to plan really well, with everything that I need to do in a day. So what does that look like? So gathering. So I'm going to be using an example here, telling you an example of how I gather my things before I go, and I, just go out there and start planning anything. So this is if you're taking notes or anything, this is under the title of planning. So how to plan, basically. So the first thing is gathering. You need to gather the things that you have to plan. An example of this is I have, like I said, I'm a student in medical school. I'm in my last year, and I have so many different things that I need to be able to do in a day. And I'll show you guys when I take off my screen. I don't even know if I can actually show myself while I'm doing this. I don't know how to do it. But I'll show you guys after. But the first thing that I do at the beginning of a year, when it comes to the gather aspect of planning, is I write down every single thing that I can think of or find that I will need to get done that year, that academic year. So at the beginning of the year, I'm gathering my exams, I'm gathering any project that I need to do, exam dates, I'm gathering any module timetables that I need to do, I'm gathering any kind of deadlines, anything, gathering all the information that you will need to plan. Because if you do this at the beginning of the year, then nothing's going to come at you by surprise, and you can come throughout the year and fit more things in if they come up. But the first thing that I do, and so the academic year has already started, so maybe you might not be able to start at the beginning, but it's never too late, so you can start this now. So from now until the end of your academic year, or the end of this year, whenever it is that you're planning, gather every single thing. So for me, that looks like going on my university websites, gathering all of my timetables, all of my deadlines, all of my, for example, this year I have a master's thesis to do. I have my final year exam, final medical school exam to do, which is an OSCE. It's like a station type thing that I have to do. That's a huge exam. I'm currently on my placement. So at the beginning of the year, I had to get all of my dates for my placement. I had to gather all of that information, all of my exam dates. You get the point. Gather everything. And you do that in the different aspects of your life. So this is where the categorize comes in. So most of us are not just students. We're not just, working people. We have more to our lives than just that one aspect. So that's when this next part comes in, categorizing. So you categorize your life in different aspects that I call the elements of life. That is your studies, your social life, your studies, your social life, your work, so what is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and then your bit, like your hustles, I'll call them, but basically like the things that you do on the side, your side hustles, whether that's your business or anything like that, and then your spiritual life. So those are the 5 aspects that I would categorize my life into when I'm gathering. So in the same way I'm gathering all of my dates and anything like that for my university, I'm also gathering all of my dates that I might have a project, I might have a business project that I'm planning, that I need to know when something needs to come out. If it needs to come out in a month's time, I'm writing all those dates in those specific categories. So those categories were your social life, your work life, your study life, your spiritual life, and also your hustle, your side hustle kind of life. That's when you categorize that. So, and then we move on to then mapping that out, and we'll go into more details in the next slides about what that looks like with your tools and what comes into. So this whole process for me usually takes me a day or even 2 days to do all of this. It's not something that you can just sit down in 1 minute, and just because you're gathering alone would take you a long time, because each section of your life needs to be gathered. Then you can need to categorize all of it, and then you map it out using your tools. I'm hoping that makes sense. So that is the examples. That's the first example of what it looks like to plan. It's the same way that God did it. First of all, he would gather, all the tools that he needed for the sanctuary. And then he would say, okay, we need people to donate everything, gold and all this material and this purple and linen and all these things, gather all the people that needed to be done in order for that were specialists in these areas. And then he would categorize them. Okay, this is for the priest, this is for the ark, this is for this is for this. And then he would show them the map according to how it was to be built. I'm talking about the sanctuary in Exodus from chapter 25. So it's the same principles that we can learn from this and how we can use this in our real lives. So then it comes to your organization. So here you've planned, you've categorized everything, you've gathered everything, you've categorized it, and now you need to actually plug it into this map, into this diary that you have. If you're like me, you probably have 6 different diaries and whatever else, for each aspect of your life. So this is where the tools come in, and I'll talk about tools a little bit later. But once the planning is done, we now start to organizing it, and organizing it is the map section of the next part. So organization. I have a little equation that I use in order for me to organize my work. So it's a simple one. It's just the amount of time that you have divided by the amount of work that you have, gives you whatever daily work is required. And this is in those 5 different categories that we're talking about. So for example, if your category that we're talking about is your educational life, your uni work, if you're a university, and you have an exam in 30 days time, and you have 30 topics to study. So that's amount of time. So that's your 30 days divided by the amount, divided by the amount of work, that's your 30 topics. That would mean that you need to do 1 topic a day. Just 1 topic a day until your exam date. Obviously, this can change. So if you have 30 days until an exam, you don't have to use your whole 30 days. You could make this 15 days. So you have 15 days to do 30 topics, which means you're doing 2 topics a day. And there's this theory, I forgot the name of it, but there's this theory that says your work expands according to the time that you give it. It's a productivity theory. So if you give yourself 30 days, it's going to take you 30 days to do the topic. If you give yourself 15 days, it's going to take you 15 days. So sometimes we fool ourselves as students when we give ourselves more time than we need to do something, because your work will expand according to the time that you give it. So if you have an exam in 30 days, I would do this, and I'll talk about this later in my actual how to study techniques, but you would obviously need to do this in maybe 15 days and do two topics. Why this is so important is because this allows you to not do too much work, either too much or too little, especially if you're organized like what we were talking about before, and you start early and you have done your gathering and your organization right at the beginning of the year, then you know exactly how much time you need to do something, and you can start early. Because I find that as a student, so for me as a medical student, people usually say to me, how on earth do you manage to do business and YouTube and ministry and all these things and medical school. And I'm like, because I don't do too much. Like, there's no reason why you need to be studying 12 hours a day every day. It's not even, I don't think that's practical. A lot of people do it and maybe it works for some people, but I just think that if you're a person that does this, starts early, has enough topics, has enough time, and then you are organized, you can do this in a way that allows you to do more in your life. Because if you give yourself 10 days to do 30 topics, then you're doing 10 topics a day. And if one topic is taking you 1 hour, that's 10 hours a day. And then you have no time to do anything else. But if I start at the beginning and I'm only doing maybe 2-3 hours a day on my medical school, then I'm doing another maybe 1 hour on my business. I use the same principle or the same equation on every aspect. So I even do this with my social life. I'm not even joking. So I will say amount of time according to the amount of friends that I have. So if I have 6 friends and I have 2 months, that means I'm seeing 1 friend a week. If that's the time that I need to, if I want to dedicate that time to my friends to see them or to do whatever, or to call them or whatever it is that I'm doing, because I just need that to be done, because otherwise I'm all over the place. And I found this in the last month or so. I haven't done any of these things that I'm telling you guys, because obviously no one's perfect and I'm not like this machine, but I haven't done any of these things that I'm telling you. And I am so disoriented. I'm so disoriented in my productivity, my time management, and all these things, because I'm not doing it. I hadn't been doing it because I can't, my life just is all over the place. So, but when I am doing this, it is at its optimum. So basically, yeah, this is the practical of how you can basically use these principles that we're talking about. These principles that we're talking about, this is how you can use them. And I put this verse here, Matthew 6:34, which says, therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. So the idea is that anxiety is living in a future that's not even there yet. So when you are living in now and you are organized, then you won't be anxious about tomorrow. Today has itself, and you need to be planned for today so that you can, do that well. So then that brings me into your productivity. So you've planned well, you've organized yourself, and then now it's time to be productive. And the question that I get the most is, how on earth do you get productive when you just can't be bothered? Like, how do you give yourself, you can do all the organization in the world, you can do all the planning in the world, but when it comes down to it, how do you actually get yourself moving? How do you actually do the work? How do you actually execute? And these are the my three main principles of how I'm productive. So the first is to pray and ask God for help. At the end of the day, your strength comes from him. He says, cast your burdens unto him and I will give you rest. He says, come unto me all that are weary, and I will give you rest. Cast your burdens unto Jesus, for he cares for you. All these things that he has promised to us if we just claim the promises. So I always pray before I study, before I do any project, before anything. I always pray. I ask God for wisdom. I ask him for help, because he is the one that is in charge of everything. And especially for me as a medic, I'm like, listen, you created me in one day. So if you can create a human being in one day, you know everything. So I need to learn from you better than I can learn from anything. And I've seen that when I pray first before I do anything, it's a completely black and white of the difference. The second thing is not to rely on motivation. The Bible says that the heart is deceitful, above all things. So, and our heart is our feelings, how we feel about things. If you follow your feelings on a day-to-day basis, your feelings are fleeting, they change. You can't rely on motivation, because motivation is a feeling. You have to rely on discipline. So when I wake up in the morning and I'm so tired and I don't want to go to work, I have to rely on the discipline instead of the motivation, because when I rely on motivation and feelings, guess what? I'm probably not going to go to work that day. I'm probably not going to do my work that day. I'm probably not going to do whatever, because I'm relying on how I feel about that thing in that moment. Ask God for help. Do what God can only do what you can't do, but you can do. God, it's not that God can't do what you can do, but God is not going to do for you what you can do for yourself. So he's not going to come and drag you out of bed. You have to drag yourself out of bed after you've asked for help. So do what you can do and let God do what he can do. And then we go into the last part, which is have accountability. I fully believe in accountability, because this has been the game changer for me, is accountability. Because I know I don't want to let someone down, or I don't want them to think I'm lazy, or I don't want them to think that I'm just a slacker. So I'm telling them, okay, today I'm going to be going to work, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing that. can you hold me accountable? If you need them to specifically tell them, can you hold me accountable? Or maybe you don't need to specifically tell them, can you hold me accountable? But when you just tell someone, oh, I'm doing a project that is due on Thursday, and you know that person's going to ask you, how's your project doing? You know, you are more likely going to do it. I know for me anyway, it works. So these are my principles of productivity. There's actual, theories of productivity that you could go into. Things like compounding, that looks like when you compound an action with another action. An example of that is compounding your breakfast with your devotion. So compounding just means putting two things together that you always do with each other. It makes it more, it's been proven with studies, it makes it more likely that you're going to be productive. So if you always wake up, make a smoothie, and then do your devotion, those two things, because they're compounded together, you're more likely going to do it. If you always come back from work and go to the gym, as soon as you leave the train station or your car or whatever, then you're more likely going to do the gym because you've compounded it with another action. So there's theories like that you can look into of productivity that are proven, and researched of how to be productive. There's also things like tools that you can use. So for example, a tool that I really like is called a Pomodoro. That's Pomodoro, Pomodoro, and it is a productivity tool. It's basically a timer. So you time yourself for 50 minutes, 25 or 50 minutes, but it's usually 50 minutes to do a task. And the theory behind that is when it's the sense of urgency. So the more urgent you feel, the more like you're going to do more work. And I have tried and tested this, and it really does work. So when I know I've got 50 minutes to read something, I'm more likely going to read through it. And then you give yourself a 5-minute break, and then you do that in a cycle of 3, and then you give yourself a longer break. I am the most productive when I use a Pomodoro, a timer in general. People use this in the smaller ways. For example, when you want to tidy your house, you time yourself for 5 minutes, do as much as you can in 5 minutes. When your timer goes off, you stop. You're more likely going to do more because your brain has a sense of urgency. So there's those productivity type of theories that you can look into and how to be productive. I recommend a blog called Getting Things Done. It is a blog and a podcast called Getting Things Done. It's really amazing. It's actually it's life-changing when it comes to productivity. It's the best thing I ever discovered. It's called the Getting Things Done. It's also a whole movement and a community that you can get into. They have a book and everything like that. So I would recommend that. And there's also another podcast called The Productivity Show. That's a podcast as well that you can listen to about productivity, which is great. But these are my 3 main principles when it comes to productivity. And I just have this verse here, Ephesians 5:15, which says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Obviously, this is in context about understanding the time that we're in the world, but it's in the same concept. You can also apply it in use the best of use of your time, even if you do apply it into the context of this verse, knowing the time of the world that we're in. We're in a time where you don't know what's happening, and with the world. So don't waste your time doing nothing. We all learned that in lockdown, right? We got our most productive. People made gardens. The things that people did in lockdown, I'm like, because why was it? Because we had time. And the time that we had, we can also still make in this time when we are, most people are not in lockdown. So yeah, it's the same concept. And the last one that I would just talk about in terms of the productivity before we go into questions is rest. Like I said before, the importance of rest. God commanded us that we rest. It's like someone commanding you to eat ice cream. It's like you're being commanded to do something that is so nice. Oh, it's ice cream is nice to me. But imagine your favorite meal, and then someone says, I command you to eat it. It's not a punishment. Rest is not a punishment. It's something that is so good for us. And it's something that if we do not do, hence why we sleep. I always think this about life, that God created us so that we are awake and sleeping for around the same amount of time. Okay, we sleep around 8 hours out of 24 hours, but 8 hours of sleep, like, why was that? Why did God create us to sleep for 8 hours? We basically sleep a third of our lives, meaning that we should be anyway, meaning that rest is so important. There is just as much physiological functioning that happens when you're resting that is just as important as when you are moving. Hence why when people don't rest, they're stressed, or they've cognitive functions are not as well as they could be. They're not as productive as they could be. Rest is so important as a student, or is someone who wants to do do well, excel in whatever you're doing. Always rest. I do not study. As soon as Friday sunset comes up, my pen goes down, even if I'm in the middle of a sentence. No, I'm joking. I'm being a bit exaggerating. But my point is that I rest. So from Friday, Saturday, I am resting for my Sabbath because it's my favorite part of the week, and I don't have to force myself to do anything. I don't feel guilty for sitting down and not doing anything, because I usually would on like a Wednesday if I'm just sitting around doing nothing. But on a Saturday, I'm not, because I know that God has blessed me with that time, and he wants to spend that time with me, and it's a time to refresh. Anything needs a refresh. Hence why even if your computer goes stuck, you just turn it on and off. It's the same thing. You need to turn on and turn off sometimes, and that is on a weekly basis. So rest is the most important thing. So yeah, that is the first part of our productivity done. So if there's any questions, I can answer that before we move on to the next part about study techniques.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Stop sharing this. I don't know how to do that. Okay, I found it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Petty. It was super interesting. I was trying to make notes in the chat and also like looking for the app and looking for podcasts at the same time. So thank you. I think one of the biggest enemies, I'm sure we would agree, of productivity is procrastination. Maybe we're going to get into that, but what would be some of the tools that you mentioned that can help combat procrastination?
Yeah. So procrastination, I saw a quote once. I think you actually posted it, Melissa, on Instagram. It was to do with procrastination, how you're stealing from yourself. I can't remember, but it was like you're stealing from yourself when you're procrastinating. Because like I said at the beginning, I think basically my point is to say procrastination is about mindset. It's talking about the motivation that I talked about before. It's the idea that when you're procrastinating, you're relying on your motivation, on your feelings. You don't feel like doing something in that moment. But for the most part, sometimes it's also to do with a kind of a physiological theory, again, of pain and pleasure, that humans are driven by pain or pleasure. So when we're procrastinating, it's because the pleasure of doing the thing that we need to do is not enough, or the pain of not doing it is also not enough. So I always say, apply pain or pleasure to the thing that you're about to do. So for example, if I need to do a essay for my thesis that I'm doing for this year, and I just can't be bothered to do it, I sit down and think to myself, what is the pleasure going to be like when I graduate and I get that first class and I can be like, wow, I did this. And that in itself, again, it's playing on your emotions, but that pleasure for me is enough to get me going. Or the pain of, okay, if I don't do this, I'm going to be so anxious, because I used to really badly suffer with anxiety, and I still do sometimes, and it's due to being overwhelmed. So I think about myself, I'm like, that anxious feeling that I get when I procrastinate, I do not ever want to feel that. So I've applied pain onto that action. I'm hoping that makes sense. So when you think about a pain or a pleasure, you can apply it that way. You can also do the whole thing that I said in the principles of productivity, of praying in that moment when you're procrastinating and realizing that that is not operating in the image of God. Because imagine if God procrastinated in coming back, or imagine if God procrastinated on the things that you're praying for and was like, oh yeah, Mel or Petty was praying about that thing. Oh, I should not procrastinate about that. That's not operating in your purpose. So it's kind of always thinking about those things, or practically having accountability, someone that you do something with, someone that you go to the gym with so you don't procrastinate the gym, someone that you study with so you don't, so those are the things that I would say about procrastination, is just get it done, just get up.
Yep, I hear that. Does anybody else want to ask a question? You're welcome just to raise your hand or just start on mute in the next minute or so. If not, we'll ask another question. If not,
I think there's some question. Someone, Rejoice, asked a question. I can.
Yeah, you can see.
Yeah. So it says, do you schedule everything, even down to when take a nap, for example? I do. So when I'm in my best self, I'm scheduling everything. So when in the gather and schedule part, I'm scheduling. So I'm waking up from, when I'm in my best part, I'm waking up at 5 a.m. So I'm waking up at 5 a.m., 5 a.m. to 5:30. I literally visualize it in my head. So I see myself getting up, going to the fridge, making my smoothie, coming back, because your brain can't tell the difference between reality and imagination, hence why you cry in movies, because your brain thinks it's real. So in the same way, when you visualize something, as a man thinketh, so is he. So when you visualize something, it's like your brain is doing it. So when it comes time, that actually helps with procrastination. When it comes time to doing it, it's like you've already done it, so it's easy to do. So like in the nighttime, I'll think about myself waking up, going to make a smoothie, or going to do whatever it is that I need to do. So I plan everything. So I'm planning my wake up time, my devotional time. I'm planning breaks in between. So I know that from 8 till 9 is a break. So in that break, I can maybe watch some Netflix, or I can do something that it's unaccounted for time, or time that it's unaccounted for, so other things can be put into it if they come up. I like what you said, I schedule when I'm sleeping, what time I'm sleeping, 10 o'clock, whenever it is, I schedule everything. When I'm calling someone, if I was to open my notes app for you right now, you'd see 4 p.m. call mom, or whatever it is that I need to do when I'm in, like I said, when I'm in my best self. So yes, and that works for me because it allows me to just know how things are working and how things are going. So that is what I would say about that.
Awesome. There's another question from Nathan, who's asking, how do you get back on track? The longer I leave important things, the more I may be stressed, but then I'm actually less likely to get into it. So when you do kind of fall off the productivity wagon or timing and scheduling, and you're kind of delaying that, how do you kind of just get back on the wagon?
Yeah, so I think that like what you said, Nathan, that's a good question, that the longer you leave things, the more stressed you get. And the reason we get stressed is because we are probably down on yourself. Oh, I need to get that done. I'm never going to get that done. I say the first thing is extend grace on yourself. Like, realize that you're not, we are striving to be like Jesus, but you're not perfect as a person. So things are going to happen. Things you are going to, like I said, in this last month of I moved and all these things, I have not had a plan. I have not been doing whatever. I've been all over the place. And I've just seen my life is a mess. It's just not a mess, but I just mean like my productivity is a mess. So what I'm personally going to do is I'm just going to accept what's happened. I can't change it. I've accepted that I've derailed from my plan. Tomorrow I'll get my planner out and then plan with the time that I do have left, what I do have left, and just go from there. Give yourself grace, understand and accept that you're not perfect, it's going to happen, and then just start again. So if you've left your studying for exam till too late, and you only have now 10 days to study everything, also use your initiative to realize, okay, what is the most important thing that I can do? Think about it that way as well. Don't try and do everything, because then you just get stressed again. Try and think, what's the most important thing that I can do right now that's going to be the most yielding benefit for me at this moment. So use also just like your logic to see what is it that you need to do the most. What is the most income yielding, I'll call it, thing, not income, but what's the thing that's going to give you the most return right now that you need to do, and go from there. So that's what I would say about that. And yeah.
Yeah, one last one, then we'll jump back into the presentation, asking how to deal with last minute tasks when something comes and it's due but wasn't scheduled. You mentioned kind of leaving windows in your schedule. Is that how you would deal with that?
Yeah, so basically just leave windows in your schedule. So when you're planning for everything, don't pack it out. So don't be like, I'm going to wake up at 5:15 and then 6 doing this, and 6, I always leave a 30-minute window between each task. And if I can't, and that's what I was saying before, when you use the formula that I said before, if you see that you have 10 tasks that you need to do in all the different aspects of your life, and if you can't do all those 10 tasks, then you either just have to reframe the equation. So you give yourself more days or less days, so that you allow yourself at least 30-minute windows between each thing. And then when it comes time to doing it, if you are doing that thing and you realize, actually, I don't need that 30-minute window that I had put in between now and between my devotional time and me starting studying, I actually don't need that 30 minutes. So let me just study now. That means you've given yourself 30 minutes for later on in the day and stuff like that. But 30 minutes, I would say, is a good time to leave yourself between each task, if you can do it that way, if it's possible for you. But it's up to you how much leeway you give yourself. So then that way, if last minute things come in, you can slot them into that time that you gather yourself. And I would also, with planning, have a review on a day-to-day basis and also on a weekly basis. So you review your day, see what you did or didn't do, what you can carry on to the next day, what you can carry on maybe even to the next week, things like that. And then on a weekly basis, you're reviewing what you didn't do, what you can carry on to next week. This is all explained way better than I'm explaining in the Getting Things Done podcast. So I would go and read that. Listen to that.
Thank you. Let's jump into the second half of your presentation. This time is really flown by.
What time is it? Okay. Oh, this is good anyway. I could probably do this in 10 minutes. Okay, so so that was all about, the theory of kind of getting things done. So when it comes to actually studying, this is something I've been harking on about a lot on my Instagram. If any of you follow me on my Instagram, if you don't, that's fine. But you can do if you're free to. But I've been talking about it a lot on my Instagram about study techniques. So just a little bit of a background. So like I said, I did a degree in biomedical sciences, and in my degree, in the first 2 years of my degree, I was averaging a mid 2.1. And that is usually my average in life in general. Like if I'm just, studying at the bare minimum, I will average on average, in the usual curve of people, that middle bit of average people, that's usually where I am. So so those first 2 years, that's what I was averaging. And then in my third year, I switched things up unknowingly, and I started to do active recall, which I'll explain what that is in a second, but I didn't even know at the time what it was. So at the time I started to do flashcards. I started to, because I realized, okay, I really want to get first. So the first thing that I did actually was I went to my lecturer and asked him to tell me what I needed in order for me to get first. If it was possible for me to get first in the first place, because sometimes if you get up to second year and you're in a third, it's probably impossible for you to get a first. But if you're on a place where you can get first class, that's where I was. It was possible, but going to be difficult. He told me exactly what I needed to do, like the marks that I needed to get in his module, and then what I needed to focus on. So that is something that I always encourage people to do when it comes to studying. Ask your teachers, ask your supervisors, ask your lecturers. Most of the time, my people perish for lack of knowledge, the Bible says. If you don't have knowledge, then you don't know what to do with it. So, and sometimes we don't know because we don't ask. So go and ask them, what is going to be on the exam? I will straight up say, what is going to be on the exam? And sometimes they'll tell you, they'll be like, oh, well, I'll focus a lot more on the physiology of the brain more than the anatomy. And I'll be like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to spend 2 days studying anatomy. I might just go over the brief of anatomy, but I'm going to study more physiology. So do the same thing with your lectures if you can. Or sometimes a smart way to do this is when usually your lecturers focus on topics that they like. So they will teach you certain things more focused on. So some lecturers are really research based. So if you're doing a course that is also research and practical and also theoretical, some lecturers will be really heavily research based. So you know that lecturer really likes research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize at least 4-5 references and quotes that I can plug into my essay, because that's going to be really great for that lecturer, is going to love it. Whereas someone else, another lecturer who maybe focuses more on the practical side, you might, change things up. So study your lecturers, ask them, and things like that. So yes, active recall when it comes to studying for just like your basic studying when you're doing your course. So I started doing that in my undergrad without knowing what it was, and then I got a first class, and I was actually in the top 3 of my class. I don't know which 1, 2, or 3. I never asked, but I was in the top 3 of my class in my whole biomedical sciences course, and that was due to that method, because that's what jumped me up. So when it came, because I didn't know what I was doing, it wasn't intentional. When it came to my medical school, I didn't carry it on. So what I did was what everyone else does. I started to take notes. You go and you read your lectures, you take notes, you reread them, you highlight, you might read your book, these things, which is the least effective, way of studying. According to research, it's called a low utility study method, meaning that it's just not going to give you a high yield results that you want. But however, the other technique that you can use is called active recall, like I said. So this means you're actively recalling things from your memory. You can do this the same way, even if you're doing like a thesis. So for example, if I'm doing a thesis and I'm doing a thesis this year, and I want to really learn about the stress and things like that in medics, so medics, nurses, anyone like that, what causes them stress. So maybe I'll go and read an article about this that I would usually reference in my paper. So if I read the article, then once I finish reading that article, I will sit there and think, okay, what have I just read? And I will come and I will try and recall as much information from that article as I can. What that will do as well is it will implement it in your brain. So when you are having casual conversations with people, you remember research things that have that you can just spit out in your field, which makes you an expert in that field. Expertism is just about knowledge and experience. So if you have knowledge in that field, and that knowledge comes from being able to actively recall it. So sometimes people will say to me, well, that doesn't really work for this, or that doesn't really work for that. No, it does. You're just switching it. So I'm going ahead of myself. Active recall. So what you're doing with active recall is you learn a piece of information by reading it. And that is called when you get the information into your brain. So that's what most people do. You would read your lecture, right? Or you might watch a video. You're getting that information into your brain. That is the information gathering. And then for the most part, what most people do is after they've read that information, they will go and they will just go and rewrite the lecture passively. This is what you call passive learning, where you just rewrite the thing that you're looking at. However, active recall is when you are basically testing yourself. So it's constantly testing yourself so that you can see how much you remembered from the things that you've just read. So when I read a lecture, what I do is as I go through the lecture, I make questions. So each lecture slide is full of information. Instead of writing notes, I write questions from the notes. So if it is a lecture about, random thing, stroke. I'm a medic, so I'm going to use everything to do with biology. Sorry, guys. So if it's about stroke and the lecture title is epidemiology of stroke, 5,000 people die every year from stroke, and 3,000 of those could be prevented through lifestyle, and 2,000 of those could be prevented through secondary prevention if doctors were able to spot it before, high risk, whatever, it could tell me. So what I will do is when I'm reading it, that first sentence that says 5,000 people die each year from stroke, what I will write in my notes, instead of writing down 5,000 people, I will write how many people die each year from stroke. The next question would be how many stroke incidences could be reversed, or not reversed, could be prevented if lifestyle was, you understand? So you make questions with those notes. So now when I finish the whole lecture, I finish that lecture, and when I'm reading this lecture, I'm taking my time. I'm really learning what I'm reading. I'm not just like quickly skimming through. I'm really learning. I'm going over it and I'm trying to understand it. When I finish that lecture, then I'll go and I'll have maybe a question, a list of maybe 15 questions, because I can't write everything. Again, you're studying according to what you've already asked your lecturer. If your lecturer says epidemiology is never going to come up in the exam, I'm not spending time writing questions on that specific lecture slide. But if the next lecture slide is about physiology, like what he said, of the brain, I'm writing questions on that slide. So you're using everything that I'm saying all while you're studying. Those questions is then I will go and test myself. I will look at those questions and be like, okay, what was that first slide? How many people die from stroke? And I'll think until I remember 5,000. I'll write down the answer, and I'll do that for all the questions. Then go back to the lecture and see how many you got right, how many you got wrong. That way you will know where the gaps in your knowledge are. And when you have those questions that you know you haven't gotten right, you can then repeat them the next day using something called spaced repetition. That's another study technique that we'll talk about in a second. But the first thing is about active recall. So that's one way of doing active recall, through questions. Another way is through flashcards. So you write the question again on this side, you write the answer on the other side, and you constantly ask yourself. Flashcards can be a bit more, you can misuse them because you can just always just look at the answer and not actually try and recall it. The theory behind this is the more harder it is for you to retrieve something from your memory, the more cemented that memory will be. Because it's like you're exercising your brain. Your brain, 50% of the glucose that you get in your food is for your brain. That's how much metabolism your brain is doing. So the more that you're doing work and doing work and doing work, of your brain, the more you're going to cement that pathway, that memory pathway, and you're going to remember it for a longer period of time. In the same way, the more heavier you lift in the gym with your muscle, the bigger it grows. It's the same way, the heavy mental load that you're lifting with your brain, the more you're going to remember. So then with active recall, you can put this in other ways. Another way of doing this is practice exams, practice questions. So if you're doing an engineering course, for example, or if you're doing a course that's not medicine, and you might think, well, how do I actively recall maths? Do example questions, just questions, past papers if you can do them, do practice equations, whatever it is that you need to do, practice codes, remember that code that you need to remember and rewrite it from memory, things like that you can do. That's how you actively recall. And then you couple that with spaced repetition. So like I said, you do all those questions. Once you finish those questions, you go through them, and then you code them according to what you got right and what you got wrong. If you got it right, that means that you can space that and you don't have to go through them for at least another 3 days. However, if you got it wrong, that means you need to repeat those questions the next day without going back to your notes. So because sometimes your brain just needs a bit of time and it will remember it. If the next day you don't remember it, then you can go back to your notes, reread again, relearn that thing again, and then you keep, if you always get it wrong, you will always repeat it the next day. If you get it right, then you can space it to about 3 days to about 5 days. You can research something called the forgetting curve. It is where this theory of spaced repetition comes from. And that is just the idea that you forget things on like an exponential curve like this. So if this is day 0 and this is day 5, by the time it's day 5, the curve is down here. So you've forgotten the information. However, when it's day 3, you're about here. So you need to basically break that up. So you're always not forgetting the information. So every 3 days, you're recalling that again, and then the curve starts again. So you're never forgetting the information. And that's where that's going. So that's the forgetting curve that you can look up, spaced repetition and active recall. Those are the things that I use to study. I don't take notes. I don't highlight and do whatever. If I do take notes, it'll be for things that I have to just memorize, maybe values and things like that, but it's not rereading notes and anything like that, and rewriting. And from that, I've always averaged a 90% in medical school, 100% sometimes in my exams, because I know the information is in my brain and I've practiced asking myself questions, which is what exams are. They're just questions. And you don't get anxious or nervous in an exam because you've basically gone through an exam environment over and over again. So those are the main things that I would say when it comes to studying. And if you couple that with your organization, if you're only doing 3 topics a day, you're going through those questions and in that way, then that is the way that I would suggest. So if you have any questions, I can answer it specific to you, but that is basically my study techniques when it comes to that. But there's obviously a bit more to it, but we don't have time to really go into it like that, but we can answer some questions and hopefully it can be a bit more tailored. Sorry, excuse me, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so you're welcome to unmute, guys, or type in the chat. Again, thank you for that, Petty. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not a student anymore, but a student of life, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess even like for like your own Bible study or for professional courses, like these things can really work. Like I've definitely experienced that forgetting curve, even when I've like studied really hard for something like a professional exam. Once that knowledge isn't used, then it just kind of disappears, no matter how long you studied it for. So
Exactly. And I use that a lot for, like what you said, for Bible study. So recently we've been going through the book of Acts. So we do a chapter a day, and say we've done Acts 1 yesterday, tomorrow is Acts 2, and we'll always recall what was Acts 1, what did it actually say? Because so many of us have read the Bible and we can't actually say the story of like a book, like in the order that it happened in. And if you do active recall every single time, so by the time you get to chapter 5, that you need to go through Acts 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that way it's cemented in your brain. So you can use this with if you need to learn anything, you should be using active recall. It's not just for studies.
There's a question, well, someone's made a suggestion that it's perhaps more specific to medicine, but I think with the 3 techniques that she's mentioned, with active recall, with the space, what do you say?
Space repetition.
And the forgetting curve, like that's relevant to all sectors. Like I work in project management, I could use all of those things that you've just described.
I'd also like to ask Priscilla what they study, so maybe I could make it more specific to you so that you can see how it can be actually practically used in not even just studying but in life in general, because it's just a learning tool. It's not necessarily like a university tool, if that makes sense.
You see Sarah's question? Sarah's asking, if you had 30 days until an exam, how many days would you space your repetition, and do you still repeat what you've learned even after the exam has passed?
That's a great question. So so if I have 30 days till an exam, so I will start that is actually about the average that I have before exams, because I study on a cycle base. I do 1 module a month, so 4 to 6 weeks, and then I have the exam. So I'm starting on day 1 and I'm giving myself half the time, or maybe about 3/4 of the time, in order for me to at least get through all the information. So I do the same thing. So if I have 30 days and I have, usually on average, I have about 80 questions, not 30. So if I'm doing about 3, maybe 4 questions a day, topics, sorry, not questions, let's say I'll make them lectures. I'm having an average of about 30 questions that I'm going through, and I'm doing this. So let's say for exam time, that's 4 hours a day of studying, maybe 5, but probably about 4 hours a day. So I'm doing those same thing. Then I am reviewing it on the same day. So I don't wait till the next day to review. Well, some people, if you have more time, I would go through the lecture. If you have more time, I'd go through the lecture, make the questions, and then review them the next day. However, because I don't have that much time, I go through the lecture, make the questions, and I answer them all on the same day. So after I've answered them all on the same day, that gives me the algorithm of my repetition. So the ones I got wrong, I will always go through them the next day on top of the new questions. And then the ones I got right, I won't go through them for 3 more days on top of the questions that I've been gathering the last few days. Does that make sense? So it's just like, and then it's like every 3 days. And if I get those questions right again after the 3 days, then it's 5 days I space it out. And then there's an app called Anki, ANKI, that does algorithms, spaced repetition algorithms for you if you put your questions in there, because it allows you, it knows like what you're getting right, what you're getting wrong. So use apps if you don't want to do it yourself. There is spreadsheets as well you can download online that people make for people for spaced repetition. So you know how to do your algorithm, but that's how I do my algorithm. So it's a lot of work, but my whole point is to remember as much as possible, so I'm not having to repeat them on a day-to-day basis with more information. Because if I'm doing that, that means I'm not actually retaining information, which means something is wrong. Either I'm not spending enough time in actually learning the information. So I'm hoping that makes sense, but I try to make sure that I'm actually learning the information so I don't have to repeat myself as more than I need to, so that I'm doing it maybe every 3 days, then every 5 days, and then again every 7 days, then again every 7 days. So after 7 days, after the third time of me going through it, which would be on the 7th day, because I've done the first day, the third day, the 5th day, and then the 7th day, this is for things that I know. So that's 4 times I've repeated this thing. And that means that I'm getting it right, which means after that, I'm doing it weekly, because I know it by now. And if something is cemented in your long-term memory, it's there. It's gonna take a while to leave. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so if, for example, you learned something on Monday and you got it right, so you're not going to look at that again until Thursday, 2 days later.
Till Wednesday, yeah.
Wednesday. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're still learning additional things on the Tuesday and the Wednesday, and then when you go back to the questions from Monday, that's in addition to those questions.
Yeah. So it's like you start on day 1 and they're compounding, but they're also moving on different days depending on whether you got it wrong or right and so forth. So it's like different, hence why you need to be organized, hence why you need that key. So I have a key, so I will highlight something in green if I've got it right, and then I'll put like the date that I first did it, so then I know that the next day. I do this in a spreadsheet so that it's just easier for me. That's what I use, because it would get too messy otherwise, and it just basically adjusts it for you. That's Anki is without an E, but yeah, you can find it. It's quite expensive on Apple. I think it's £23 as the app, but on Android it's free. And I think their desktop version is also free, but you can find people that do spreadsheets that do these algorithms for you, because the algorithms is basically the same, because it's based on, like I said, the forgetting curve. So yeah.
One more question before we wrap up, which was, how can you advise, from Priscilla, can you advise on ways to become more confident to increase clinical skills?
Okay. I'm trying to find where the question was, but yeah, it's fine. Can you advise on becoming more confident on clinical skills? Oh yeah, I can see it. Can you advise where to become more confident to increase clinical skills? Practice. I have found it being in my internship at the moment, the more I practice something, the more confident I am in doing it. And be honest. So for example, if basic clinical skills like cannulation, Priscilla, or like taking bloods, is something that's very basic, but until you have done it, it's not basic. It's something it's hard. So I would be honest with your peers, be like, I have not done this before, can I watch you do it? Watch them do it the first time. It says learn one, watch one, teach one. I think that's the thing. So learn it first, watch it being done, and then try it yourself. You can try it with supervision, and then after that, be proactive in doing it yourself. So if the opportunity arises itself where the blood needs to be taken, or the cannula needs to be done, or whatever needs to be done, be like, can I go do that please by myself? And then just know that you have learned it and you know it. We all have the what's that thing? Imposter syndrome, where we think, oh, I don't know this, but you do. If you got into medical school and you are studying, you're passing your exams, it means you do know it. So, and that first time that you do will be daunting, but the more you do it, is the more confident you will be, because you know that you can do it, right? And even if you do get it wrong, it's okay. That's why you're studying, is to get things right, is to get things wrong so you can get them right. So I would say that ask for help, watch, be honest, and say what you can and can't do, and then be proactive and actually just going and doing it, even if you're nervous, even if you're so scared to do that thing because you're thinking, I don't know how to do this. You do know it because you learned it. So I'll just hype yourself up a little bit, and then just be proactive. That's what I would say. And also, like, constantly learn. So I watch videos a lot on practical skills. And you probably know these apps anyway, but I use Geeky Medics, and I also use Online Med Ed. Online Med Ed is amazing for clinical reasoning and, you know, actually being in the wards and stuff. And then Geeky Medics is really good for the practical skills as well. So just continue to read them, and, you know, practice is what I'd say.
Awesome. Anybody have any final questions before we close? Thank you so much, Petty, for a really jam-packed session. I think we've learned a lot, lots of food for thought. And I think I like productivity as well, but sometimes I feel like I have to turn it down because it's almost far too detailed. But you've kind of shown that the detail pays off, and actually being really structured then yields really good results, as you've demonstrated. So thank you for, I guess, giving me personally the confidence kind of to be like, you know what, I'll own it hour by hour. Time scheduling. Rejoice has got a question on learning the anatomy. Any apps that you can recommend?
I would recommend, I don't know if they have an app, but KenHub. They have an atlas, and I used to use that all the time in my pre-clinical years for anatomy. KenHub is amazing. And also, there's a guy, it's not an app, but again, there's a guy on YouTube called Dr. Fink, Fink. He's really good. He's a really good teacher, depending on your, you know, learning method. But KenHub is great for anatomy. That's for apps. There is also this anatomy app that I know a lot of my colleagues, I see them using, but it just looks too complicated for me. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like, you know, the body, and it's really detailed, but I don't use that. I just use KenHub, and that was really good for me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, everyone, and for sharing.
Thank you.
Nella Grace.
Thank you, guys.
On YouTube, on Instagram, and she shares this stuff all the time in her stories, and I'm sure there'll be more comment coming. Question. Sometimes we trick ourselves that we're being productive when we prioritize minor projects or assignments over major ones, but really we're procrastinating. True.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. We're going to finish up. It'd be awesome if you could just pray for us, Petty, as we go. I know that I'm sure we could all use a little extra prayer in our lives, and just that willingness to kind of seize back the time that God has given to us, and sometimes we just, I guess, waste or don't see to be as valuable as perhaps you've demonstrated through some of the Bible text you shared with us at the beginning. So yeah, let's bow our heads and pray.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you so much for time, the time that we've just had to come together now and learn a bit more about how to use our time, how to manage our time to be productive, how to study, all these things, Lord. These are all blessings and gifts from you. And I'm so grateful that you're a God that loves us so much, that you would give us these principles in your word, and you would teach us these things. And Lord, I live we all live in the truth that we are made in your image, that you dwell inside of us, and we are a temple of the Holy Spirit. So Lord, everything that we do, may it be poured out from the Holy Spirit and from his ways. Lord, please give us the knowledge and the wisdom that we need in order for us to go about our day-to-day things. I pray for every single student, every single person that joined this live, Lord, that needs you, Lord, because they need that wisdom from you. I pray that even now that you might flood them with knowledge and with wisdom of how to go about their studies, how to be a light for you in everything that they're doing, Lord, so that you may get the glory in their excellent work that they're doing, either in uni or even outside of uni. Father God, I thank you so much once again for your love, for your grace, and for everything that you give us. May you please help us to be in your word first before anything else, so that we can prioritize that time with you, and from that may it flow everything else. Thank you so much for this evening. I pray that you please be with everyone here. Please protect us, keep us safe. And Lord, I just thank you for what you're about to do in our lives, in all these different aspects. I thank you for your spirit. I thank you for your son, Jesus Christ, who has died for our sins so that we can come before you even in this prayer and have this communion with you. I pray for just for success for every single person here. I thank you so much for this ministry. I thank you for NECyouth and the things that they're doing for the youths in all the different aspects of their lives. May you continue to flourish and be blessed. And I pray all of this in your son Jesus' name through the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an awesome week. Please do message Percy if you have any further questions on her channels, and like, subscribe, all that good stuff.
Thank you, everyone. This was really fun.
Thank you.
You're welcome.